'Tis the season for Christmas shopping, all kinds of holiday shopping, and all that crap. I don't really get into it myself. I'm kind of a bah humbug, but it's also the season that a lot of people start to think about charitable giving. Actually, recently there was a natural disaster, in the Philippines, and it got a lot of attention. The little Bitcoin charity that I'm involved with, Free Aid, actually did a project to help out with disaster relief in the Philippines. The way it went was really interesting. It started really organically. My partner, Teresa at Free Aid, put up a blog post and she said, look, my friend from college lives in the Philippines and I'm able to basically send Bitcoins to him and then he can sell them for local currency. And with one Bitcoin, we can get all these pounds of rice and all these supplies and medical items to help people with the disaster relief. People started sharing it on social media. It kind of got around on Twitter. And then she wrote a blog post about it and ended up on Reddit. And it turned out that Free Aid raised quite a bit of coin in order to send to Teresa's contact in the Philippines. And we met some other people. And all in all, it's still kind of going. Got some pictures and information posted on our blog at fr33aid.com. But all in all, I think it was over 7 Bitcoins that were raised and then sent to the Philippines for relief. So that was really cool to me because it shows it's really difficult. If you're trying to send dollars to other kinds of legacy money to the Philippines or to anywhere in the world, you can encounter some barriers. But with Bitcoin, it made it just so easy to do this charitable and relief work. So I was really excited about that. If you want to read about it, you can go to fr33aid.com. And actually, Andreas, I heard that you did an educational project yourself on Twitter.
So if Twitter has melted down, I'm the culprit. Basically, what I did was on the occasion of reaching 2,000 followers, I suggested that I would donate Bitcoin to new users. It's something I've done before. I did it at 500 followers. I did it at 1,000 followers. And each time I gave a small amount of Bitcoin with the following idea that I can spend hours explaining Bitcoin to you, or you can just try it. And if you try it, you're going to understand it far better than any explanation I can offer. And so I wanted to get more people to try it. I went a bit bigger this time. Last time I gave out to 20 people, the first 20 to reply to one of my tweets. This time I've left it open-ended. I also solicited others to join me and match my donations. So far, we've raised 3 Bitcoin, which is going to fund probably some 2,000 to 3,000 of a millibit or so to thousands of people who have replied. I started trying to collect addresses manually, quickly discovered that Twitter was about to blow up on me, and now I've written some scripts to pull out the Bitcoin addresses and generate the transactions. Somewhere in there, Max Kaiser retweeted it. That turned on the fire hose. I think it's a great way to get new people to adopt Bitcoin, and it's so much easier to understand Bitcoin if you can use it. All of us can donate $1 or so to someone who is new to Bitcoin, and it's the best way to introduce new people. So try it out. I've been absolutely overwhelmed with requests since I did it, and I think we're going to hit more than 2,000 new adoptions.
Yeah, I think that that's a great initiative you've got going on there, Andreas. And I really think that it's important at times like this where the price is spiking up to make outreach efforts like that because people are interested right now and they're not interested. It'd be great if they were interested because they understand the revolutionary world changing nature of this. They can make, life better for everybody on the planet, but probably they're interested because of the price. But because they're interested in the price, they're interested. So there's that opportunity there where you can flip the switch, right? And you can say the couple of things to them, or you can help them to see it in the right way, and then they can click and become people who understand about Bitcoin, as opposed to people who are just excited about Bitcoin. In addition to the 2 initiatives that you guys talked about, I have a small list of Bitcoin accepting charities that I thought we could share on the air in case anybody is looking for alternatives. So
I know Sean's Outpost has gotten a lot of support, but there actually are other ones out there too.
Yeah, no, the list is growing. I mean, this isn't, it's not US dollar lists quite yet, but, we've got like 20 names on this list. So the first one is the BitGive Foundation, which is at bitgivefoundation.org. Bitcoin 100 at bitcoin100.org, Bitcoin Not Bombs at bitcoinnotbombs.com. The EFF is accepting it at supporters.eff.org. Foundation for Economic Education, which I believe just received a donation of 1,000 Bitcoins from Roger Ver the other day.
Yes.
It's really nice to see this getting out there, because they just recently in the last couple of months started accepting Bitcoin. And I know they had a big influence on my economic education too. So that's at fee.org. The Khan Academy at www.khanacademy.org. The Lifeboat Foundation at lifeboat.com. Peace Geeks at peacegeeks.org. Sean's Outpost at seansoutpost.com. Shire Sharing. Do you know what they do?
Yeah, Shire Sharing delivers Thanksgiving baskets to needy families in New Hampshire right now, but they may expand later. And they also give like backpacks with personal care items to homeless people.
Shiresharing.org. Songs of Love at songsoflove.org. Virtual Doctors at virtualdoctors.org. And then there's a couple of organizations, including Free Aid, that are actively supporting for the typhoon in the Philippines. So there's Free Aid, and you guys are fr33aid.org. BitMe is also collecting at bitme.com. Cause Central is collecting at Cause Central. That's cause-central.com. And finally, the Typhoon Haiyan Fund, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is at Typhoon Haiyan, HAIYAN, relieffund.org. So if you are feeling like you've done really well over the run up from $100 to $1,000 on Bitcoin, you should give back this season. There are lots of options.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see this proliferation of charitable and educational organizations that accept Bitcoin and do really cool things with it. It's just really exciting for me to see. I remember the survey that came out from Zero Hedge back in, it was at least a year ago now at this point. It said actually the most common use of Bitcoins was as gifts, tips, and charitable donations. And maybe that will actually continue. I hope so.
If you are not ready to give to a charity, stuff those stockings this Christmas. Get all your family a little amount of Bitcoin, millibit each, 10 millibits each. Put a paper wallet with Bitcoin in their stocking and tell them to hold on to it for a year, see what happens. Everyone I've heard who's done that in the past has great stories to share, as they've ended up with nieces and nephews with lots and lots of money.
So speaking of which, by the way, Adam, I just want to say thanks for reading out that list of Bitcoin charitable organizations, because I have actually had a lot of people ask me for exactly such a list. So I think that will be really useful to people. Yeah. Speaking of Christmas stocking stuffers and stuff like that, it's really interesting to think about the possibilities of basically shopping for gifts and doing holiday shopping with Bitcoin, which is essentially behaving like a deflationary kind of currency. I've heard a lot of stories of sort of buyer's remorse, people who regret spending Bitcoins when they were at a certain value, now that they've gone up to $1,000 per Bitcoin. There are also stories of people who are really happy that sort of hung on to their Bitcoins, or that they replaced Bitcoins, or that maybe they bought Bitcoins a year ago. And it just adds this really interesting dynamic to holiday shopping, because at least for me, growing up in the US, what I've constantly seen throughout my whole life is people taking on a lot of consumer debt, basically credit card debt, during the holiday season to buy gifts that they can't really afford, to impress people that they don't really know or care about that much, or to make it seem like they are wealthier than they are. And then they spend months and months paying it off, and they pay interest, and they end up paying more for those gifts than they could have if they had paid for them in cash up front. But with Bitcoin, it's a whole different dynamic. You could actually end up, quote, paying more or feeling like you overpaid for a gift if, for instance, you spend some Bitcoin today and replace it, and then a year later, Bitcoins are worth $100,000 each. And I've heard the buyer's remorse stories, the people who bought a t-shirt for 2 Bitcoins a year ago or something like that. You're also seeing the fire sales of vendors who are offering stuff at deep, deep discounts just so they can get their hands on some Bitcoin. I've seen t-shirts for $5 in Bitcoin. They're doing that not because they're being charitable or whatever, but because they believe that Bitcoin is going to go up if they hang on to it. It introduces some really interesting dynamics. What do you guys think? What's your experience been? Have you done any holiday shopping with Bitcoin?
What I did this year was I had a number of Bitcoin set aside, which was like 3 or 4 actually, that I set aside in October and was like, okay, that's what I'm going to spend on Christmas presents and on various things through the holiday season. And so I'm actually still planning on spending that amount. It just is worth more than it was at the point that I was originally kind of allocating it. So I think that it's kind of about making decisions and then just figuring out, with Bitcoin and any of these deflationary currencies, the thing that you don't want to do is have a really short time frame, right? So for next year, what I'm planning on doing actually is doing this early, right? So next year, I'll figure out how many Bitcoins I want to allocate to gifts, except I'm going to do it in January. And then I'm going to buy that many coins in January, and then I'm just going to let it sit there and wait. And in 11 months, I'll see what it's worth. And at that point, I'll use it for gifts or use some of it for gifts. And I really like these things where you can artificially give yourself a long timeline because you don't need to have a short time frame on everything if you can look further ahead. Yeah, but making like last minute purchases with Bitcoin seems like it's just dangerous. I don't know. I mean, like I really like spending Bitcoin and it's very spendable, so I don't have the problem of not spending it. But at the same time, the incentives are very contrary. I think it's a tough decision.
That's interesting that you mentioned having sort of a holiday present fund, or I've had something similar too. I would like to turn some percentage of my Bitcoin into gold. So I actually have a gold fund that I had started a little while ago. And I said, okay, well, when it hits this price, I'm going to buy some gold with Bitcoin. There's really interesting things you can do with sort of setting aside little savings jars and savings accounts with Bitcoin. And it's super easy to do that because you don't have to like create a new bank account or anything. You can just earmark a little wallet for your Christmas fund. Or
That's exactly right. And it's all the advantages of what banks used to deliver to you with an actual return on savings, except you don't need the bank. It takes a fraction of the time. And I mean, that's the default. If you're holding Bitcoin, it is default deflationary as opposed to needing to put it into a bank account. So yeah, no, it's very cool.
There's one other aspect to it, which is that when you do your purchases in Bitcoin, you're essentially moving that money through a very specific part of the economy. Those who have the foresight and vision to already accept Bitcoin and are willing to take that risk for a new technology, perhaps are also ideologically kind of in favor of the kind of decentralization that Bitcoin causes. And that at the same time means that you're taking money away from Walmart and Macy's and all of these giant corporations that pay their employees little to nothing with no medical care or anything like that. So, it's also an ideological spend. It allows you to divert money into an economy that you support from an economy that you don't.
Not every Bitcoin accepting merchant has great healthcare for their employees or anything like that. And I think there are people who would definitely shop at Walmart if they started accepting Bitcoin tomorrow. But I do agree that it is sort of an ideological decision. And in a sense, you're sending a signal with your wallet by how you spend your money and who you support.
I like Adam's approach, which is a fixed Bitcoin spending, variable gift purchase. So it's like a month ago, I had put aside a Bitcoin and I was going to buy a 20-inch TV. And now I'm still buying a flat screen TV, but it's going to be a 20-foot one.
That's hilarious. That's exactly what I did too. I have a 29-inch monitor showing up today. That's that. And actually, I wanted to mention that. So Black Friday was really an interesting experience because on the one hand, it was really successful for Bitcoin. But I don't know if you guys actually went and shopped at any of the Black Friday deals. They weren't very good. That was the funny part about it, is that like you could go to Amazon and look at the dollar prices of anything and look at the dollar prices on Bitcoin Store or bitshop.us or any of the other, we want to be Amazon except with Bitcoin attempts that are out there. And their discounts were pretty pathetic because, again, it doesn't scale very well. So I think that right now, the fact that so much of these Bitcoins are being spent within the Bitcoin economy really speaks to that ideological nature of it, because otherwise there are lots of incentives to spend it other places, to sell your Bitcoin and to do it other ways. And in some cases, I've actually done that. But, still, I think that the majority of my purchases are going to wind up routing directly through Bitcoin this time, just because, again, I think it's more about rewarding people who are accepting it, even if they don't, keep it as Bitcoin, even if they just convert it through BitPay instantly and they don't even care about it. I don't care about that. What I care about is that they bothered to set it up. They are willing to accept it. And so I want to reward that.
Right.
I do too, but I have to admit a stronger driver for me to part with my Bitcoin It's like we said, like I usually replace it afterwards by buying the dollar equivalent of more Bitcoin so my total Bitcoin holdings don't go down. But for me to want to do that, like I really need a discount too at this point, because there's so many merchants, you know, that accept Bitcoin. And yeah, like I've supported them in the past just because they simply accepted Bitcoin. That's great. But at this point, there's so many of them coming on board that really helps if they give some extra incentive to spend Bitcoin.
So what's a good discount? Because Bitcoin Store has 0% markup. If you're not talking about physical products, it's a lot easier to really give that substantial discount. But how do you do it with physical products? Do you literally just have to have a long-term perspective? Because if you did have a long-term perspective, you know, if you were able to say, okay, well, we're going to sell this computer and we're going to sell it for 20% off, but we're going to keep the Bitcoin for 6 months minimum. Does that suddenly change the model, and does it make it so a 20% discount could actually work if you have the ability to float that long-term time frame?
Oh, it's risky. And so not many people are going to be willing to do that unless they're really, really sold on the idea of Bitcoin. But I think it could work if you had some, I guess if you had some cash up front and you were willing to sort of purchase the electronics or whatever items up front and then slowly sell them off for Bitcoin, because you do need some liquidity, right? You need some cash flow if you're going to restock your inventory. I think that's something for the people who run these businesses.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. And actually, you've given me the answer and you didn't even know it. The answer is to not only sell for Bitcoin. The answer is to sell for both and to have the dollar cover your cost and the Bitcoin be pure profit. And you want to incentivize people over time to move to Bitcoin because ultimately you're going to make more profit. And that's like the thing, you know, Stephanie, you know, people who are missing out on taking and keeping Bitcoin by selling them immediately to BitPay, well, they're missing out. I mean, like they're accepting it and they're gaining that instantaneous advantage, but they're not gaining any of the long-term advantage. And really, I think that's where the value is. It takes people time to see that, but that is where the value is. You know, I mean, all of these problems, if you stretch out the time frame on them, it gets so much smoother.
The 3 rules of business for me when I started the Bitcoin business model, which we discussed in some of the earlier episodes, was rule number 1, it has to be Bitcoin accretive. Rule number 2, it has to be US dollar spending at a lower rate than it is Bitcoin accretive. And rule number 3, it has to generate enough cash flow in US dollars and grow exponentially. So the first 2 rules work, which is basically what you just said, Adam. You need the US dollar revenue in order to cover your fixed costs that are not otherwise covered. But there's one thing you guys missed, which is that laptop that you're trying to sell is also rotting away on your shelf because that model is becoming obsolete faster than ever. So not only do you have to take the long view on Bitcoin, but you also have to take the short view on inventory because you need to move that before it becomes obsolete. So swapping something that is losing value fast for something that holds its value for a longer time is actually a very smart business decision.
So I guess back to the question of what is a good discount. I mean, it would probably depend on the industry, but I think as high a discount as someone could bear. I mean, personally, when I do voiceover services, when I'm thinking about pricing for those, I always give like at least a 20% discount for Bitcoin. And I think that's pretty attractive. If somebody offers between 20 and 30% discount on their services or goods for buying in Bitcoin, I think I would usually do that.
That's the other way to look at it, which is that the discount that you offer is the price point where the buyer's hoarding instinct reaches equilibrium with the seller's hoarding or anti-hoarding instinct. And quite honestly, what you need to do is lower your discount as much as you're comfortable until you start seeing sales start to peak. And then you know you've hit that magic point where you're overcoming resistance of hoarding by your own discounting. It is very much a supply-demand market, and the discount rate is very much the price equilibrium point.
Spoken like a true Bitcoin-apreneur.